talking about program or be programmed. Impulse pickup, and I didn't have a lot of context around it when I got it, but it's been kind of blowing me away, and I'm excited to continue on, and I'm very excited to talk about it because I already have a lot of thoughts jumbling around. So let's get into it. And just the way it begins, like when I read this, it had hooked me right away. When human beings acquired language, we learned not just how to listen, but how to speak. When we gained literacy, we learned not just how to read, but how to write. And as we move into an increasingly digital reality, we must learn not just how to use programs, but how to make them. And he goes on to elaborate on this idea, and it'll be clearer as we keep going. But I think that is just, even I still, people aren't really talking about it in this way. And I think it's such a valuable insight. I will say, even as I got to the end of this chapter, I guess foreshadowing here a little bit, I noted that I'm still unsure about how I'm feeling on all of this, because his thesis is very compelling, and I think he's making great points, has a strong argument, and there's a lot of value in what he's saying. But there's just this thing that I haven't been able to pinpoint. It carries a little bit of an assumption or bias, as he would maybe describe it. Just that tech is the way forward, but he's definitely challenging my perspective. He's definitely forcing me to consider a different perspective here. We'll get into a little bit more of that. So while I'm speaking very highly of it, there's a piece of it that I'm still kind of working through. So we are creating a blueprint together, a design for our collective future. The possibilities for social, economic, practical, artistic, and even spiritual progress are tremendous. Just as words gave people the ability to pass on knowledge for what we now call civilization, networked activity could soon offer us access to shared thinking, an extension of consciousness still inconceivable to most of us today. The operating principles of commerce and culture, from supply and demand to command and control, could conceivably give way to an entirely more engaged, connected, and collaborative mode of participation. And that's been the promise of so much of technology since its inception. And for a while, I think that felt like it was true, that was the case. But today, that's not what we're feeling. And too many of us are experiencing unintended consequences here. And we just need to be more thoughtful about the direction that we're heading. Retailers migrate online only to find their prices undercut by automatic shopping aggregators. Culture creators seize interactive distribution channels only to grow incapable of finding people willing to pay for content they were happy to purchase before. Educators who looked forward to accessing the world's bounty of information for their lessons are faced with students who believe that finding an answer on Wikipedia is the satisfactory fulfillment of an inquiry. Parents who believed their kids would intuitively multitask their way to professional success are now concerned those same kids are losing the ability to focus on any one thing. And then he provides some more examples here, but I wanted to get into this part a little bit. Educated lay people who saw in the net, the internet, a new opportunity for amateur participation in previously cordoned off sectors of media and society instead see the indiscriminate mashing and mixing up of pretty much everything in an environment where the loud and the lewd drown out anything that takes more than a few moments to understand. And I think it was at this point where I was like, all right, I'm gonna like this. And I'm gonna have so many different ways of saying the things that I've been thinking for a while. Social and community organizers who saw in social media a new safe way for people to gather, voice their opinions, and affect bottom-up change are often recoiling at the way networked anonymity breeds mob behavior, merciless attacks, and thoughtless responses. A society that looked at the internet as a path forward, a path toward highly articulated connections and new methods of creating meaning, is instead finding itself disconnected, denied deep thinking, and drained of enduring values. So I wanted to pause here because there's kind of a personal synchronicity in my life after having just watched Jobs, the movie about Steve Jobs, and exploring some of his interviews and stuff like that, and really familiarizing myself with his philosophy and a kind of approach to life and the way he thought. And a lot of the same themes came up at that point. And so, right, like all of these promises and expectations that we had going, at the beginning and at the introduction of all of these new technologies or platforms, the reality of them is just so much different than we expected, but it's also very different than it was at its onset. So the rationale for these beliefs was rooted in like those early experiences where we saw the flashes of it, and the potential was there. But along the way, we took some wrong steps, and our actual experience is just so different. But he's providing an optimistic point of view here, and he says it doesn't have to turn out this way, and it won't if we simply learn the biases of the technologies we are using and become conscious participants in the ways they are developed. Faced with a networked future that seems to favor the distracted over the focused, the automatic over the considered, and the contrary over the compassionate, it's time to press the pause button and ask what all this means to our future, to the future of our work, our lives, and even our species. And while questions may be similar in shape to those facing humans passing through other great technological shifts, they're even more significant this time around, and they can be more directly and purposely addressed. And the big unrecognized news here is about a whole lot more than multitasking or pirated MP3s or super fast computers at investment houses shortcutting our stock trades. It is that thinking itself is no longer, at least no longer exclusively, a personal activity. It's something happening in a new networked fashion. But the cybernetic organism so far is more like a cybernetic mob than new collective human brain. People are being reduced to externally configurable nervous systems, while computers are free to network and think in more advanced ways than we ever will. And I consider that. So we have this opportunity, right? Like we have the opportunity to, the network effect here can create a somewhat of a collective consciousness, for lack of a better term. We can create a somewhat of a living organism, and it can be this big, beautiful thing. And it can be like a big collective brain. And instead of being kind of the difference here, the distinction between that and the mob is like this unified sort of healthy kind of natural thing versus very independent and harsh mob mentality. I didn't do that justice there, but I'll move forward. We need a wholesale reorganization of the way we operate our work, our schools, our lives, and ultimately our nervous systems in this new environment. And so one of the things that I'd like to just sort of summarize is, he's making the case here, a strong case, that, just like all revolutionary tech innovations throughout history, this is something that is it's the future. And he's saying it pretty plainly like this, like resistance is futile is something he's literally saying. And, just like writing and books or the wheel or something, like this is something that's just going to be part of our future, right? And I think part of my reflex to be like, ooh, I don't know how I feel about this is I don't love the expectation that you have to participate in this because it requires so much of you. But I think ultimately what has sort of cooled that knee-jerk reaction for me here is he's making the case that this thing is gonna be here regardless, but very clearly the direction that we're heading is not compatible with us, and it's not looking good. And so we need to find a way to adapt and evolve our relationship to it, because as we'll get into this a little bit more, but he explains our nervous systems are, since genuinely, they're getting fried by the way that we are integrating technology in our lives. And we continue to externalize our thinking processes to computers and networks in such a way that we lose the skills of those things. And so we become increasingly dependent on these. So we're becoming more dependent. There's, physically the way that we engage with this is bad for our nervous system. It's creating anxious, depressed people. And that's a structural issue, right? And so at the end of, as we'll get into, his argument is really about rethinking, taking, as he mentioned, pause, rethinking how we're going to move forward with this, because we need a healthier dynamic that is a more symbiotic relationship with us physically, for one thing, but also we need to make sure that, we're thinking critically here and not outsourcing some really important human skills. And so this is where he digs into this comparison, and I probably should. So in the long run, each media revolution offers people an entirely new perspective through which to relate to their world. Language led to shared learning, cumulative experience, and the possibility for progress. The alphabet led to accountability, abstract thinking, monotheism, and contractual law. The printing press and private reading led to a new experience of individuality, a personal relationship to God. The Protestant Reformation, human rights, and the Enlightenment. With the advent of a new medium, the status quo not only comes under scrutiny, it is revised and rewritten by those who have gained new access to the tools of its creation. Unfortunately, such access is usually limited to a small elite. The axial age invention of the 22-letter alphabet did not lead to a society of literate Israelite readers, but a society of hearers who would gather in the town square to listen to the Torah scroll read to them by a rabbi. Yes, it was better than being ignorant slaves, but it was a result far short of the medium's real potential. Likewise, the invention of the printing press in the Renaissance led not to a society of writers, but one of readers. Except for a few cases, access to the press was reserved by force for the use of those already in power. Broadcast radio and television were really just extensions of the printing press. Expensive, one-to-many media that promote the mass distribution of the stories and ideas of a small elite at the center. We don't make TV, we watch it. Computers and networks finally offer us the ability to write. And we do write with them on our websites, blogs, and social networks. But the underlying capability of the computer era is actually programming, which almost none of us knows how to do. We simply use the programs that have been made for us and enter our text in the appropriate box on the screen. We teach kids how to use software to write, but not how to write software. This means they have access to the capabilities given to them by others, but not the power to determine the value-creating capabilities of these technologies for themselves. And he goes on to say, we've really embraced new technologies like the at the moment's of similar change throughout history, but he's very adamant that the stakes are higher than ever where we're at. Before, failing meant surrendering our agency to a new elite. In a digital age, failure could mean relinquishing our nascent collective agency to the machines themselves. And that process appears to have already begun. And he calls out this interesting dynamic here where, like, in the past, right, when movies were invented, the audiences were like awestruck by the stars, the movie stars, TV stars, right? Radio personalities, authors, right? With all of the developments of those mediums, people became passionate about celebrating the humans that have masterfully kind of captured the essence of that medium. But with computers and networks, it's not the same. I think maybe we saw a glimpse of it. Influencers had a moment, but pretty quickly that eroded, and what's been consistent has been our more of an obsession with the devices rather than the people or the content, right? Like people don't, unless you're really into the, audio technical details, you're not, like, people weren't obsessed with radios the way that we are today, or obtaining a radio. Whereas today it's about getting the newest iPhone or whatever. It's like a status symbol. And we're almost more excited about the new device to engage with stuff than the stuff itself. And so instead of optimizing our machines for humanity, or even the benefit of some particular group, we are optimizing humans for machinery. And that's why the choices we make or don't make right now really do matter as much or more than they did for our ancestors contending with language, text, and printing. The difference is in the nature of the capability on offer, namely programming. We're not just extending human agency through a new linguistic or communications system. We are replicating the very function of cognition through external, extra-human mechanisms. These tools are not mere extensions of the will of some individual or group, but tools that have the ability to think and operate other components in the neural network, namely us. So yeah, then we go on, and he talks about thinking, and this is something that I really gravitated toward and took a lot out of. The unease pondering what it might mean to have some of our thinking done out of body by an external device is arguably just a computer era version of the challenges to self-image or proprioception posed by industrial machinery. The industrial age challenged us to rethink the limits of the human body. Where does my body end and the tool begin? The digital age challenges us to rethink the limits of the human mind. What are the boundaries of my cognition? And while machines once replaced and usurped the value of human labor, computers and networks do more than usurp the value of human thought. They not only copy our intellectual processes, our repeatable programs, but they also discourage our more complex processes, our higher order cognition, contemplation, innovation, and meaning making. That should be the reward of outsourcing our arithmetic to silicon chips in the first place. So pausing here, and he gets into, as our own obsolescence looms, we continue to accept new technologies into our lives with little or no understanding of how these devices work and work on us. So one of the things that came up for me was the sustained thought required now is the sort of real reflection that happens inside a human brain, thinking alone or relating to others in small, self-selecting groups. However elitist that may sound to the techno mob, Freedom, even in a digital age, means freedom to choose how and with whom you do your reflection. And not everything needs to be posted for the entire world with comments on and copyright off. In fact, it's the inability to draw these boundaries and distinctions, or the political incorrectness of suggesting the possibility, that paints us into corners and prevents meaningful, ongoing, open-ended discussion. And I believe it's this meaning we are most in danger of losing. So this is an extension of what he was talking about, kind of outsourcing our thinking and externalizing these things. And that really hit home for me. There's going to be a quote here coming up. It's what I've been looking for. But basically, so many of us are externalizing our memories to technology that we no longer have to practice it ourselves. We don't have to work on that cognitive ability. And it's easy to see in things like when people are at shows or on a vacation or, at this monument, right? And their phones are out because they want to capture this thing that they want to remember, but then they don't ever look at that video. And there is an interesting extension of thought there in both that documentary about social media. Jaron Lanier has also talked about this, and that experience of like recording at the event. But anyway, the point here is we're externalizing our memory, and it's actually making us worse at the memory function. And as a personal anecdote here, that's essentially what these are. These help me externalize my memory, make sure that I'm capturing thoughts as they come to me in the moment so that I can have them down. But one of the things that I've come to realize, and something that I've been thinking quite a bit about lately, is that when it comes time for me to draw on that knowledge, that wisdom, no matter how intensely I understand it in this moment and how well I communicate it here, that's not a permanent, I'm not developing a permanent recall ability there. And so one thing that I've been considering is, for one, the almost need for me to consume less, to be more selective about what I'm consuming so that my working memory isn't plagued with a bazillion things at one time, all the time. But also part of the memory faculty is re-engaging with things over periods of time, because if it's a use it or lose it kind of situation. So one thing I'm looking into I'm glad that he addressed it too, but it's like recognizing that as a challenge. And yet we're talking about creating a network effect that can kind of serve as collective thinking ability, and having infinite access to information in our fingertips. How do our cognitive functions fit into this? What kind of conscious considerations do we need to make? And what can I take away to bring into my own life with all of that in mind? So then we kind of wrap up on this in the introduction here with just the kind of mention of the difference, the experiential difference as technology has progressed, or engaging with networks or technology over time. And one thing is like writing a letter is different than writing an email. So writing an email is not the same as writing a letter, and sending a message through a social networking service is not the same as writing an email. Each of these acts not only yields different results, but demands different mindsets and approaches from us. Just as we think and behave differently in different settings, we think and behave differently when operating different technology. And this gets into chapter 1 called Do Not Be Always On. Chapter 1, Time, do not always be on. The human nervous system exists in the present tense. We live in a continuous now, and time is always passing for us. Digital technologies do not exist in time at all. By marrying our time-based bodies and minds to technologies that are biased against time altogether, we end up divorcing ourselves from the rhythms, cycles, and continuity on which we depend for coherence. So he speaks very fondly about the early days of the internet. He says, the beauty of the early net was its timelessness. So you would have these conversations on bulletin boards or through email over weeks or months. People had to connect their computers to phone lines and then dial in through a modem to a server. All this not only took time, but it made going online an intentional act. So most of your life was spent offline, and a few special moments or maybe a couple of hours in the evening were spent online, exploring files and participating in discussions. And since everybody was logging in from different locations at different times, most online experiences were what we called asynchronous. This meant that unlike a regular conversation or phone call where we exist together in the same moment and speak back and forth in real time, these online conversations were more like passing letters back and forth. You would go online, find the conversation you were participating in, and then see all the posts that occurred between one evening and the next. After reading the responses, you would then decide whether you wanted to add something and either compose it on the spot, or maybe you would write the response offline and then come back and paste it in later or even the next day. So it was like the quality, as he describes it, was like playing a chess game by mail. Nothing was rushed. If anything, because these conversations were asynchronous, they had the luxury of deeply considering what they were saying. It became a place for doing the kind of deliberation and contemplation that couldn't happen in the harried real world of jobs, kids, and automobiles. This was a thought that I meant to address earlier when he had said something similar about creating meaning and being denied of deep thinking, drained of enduring values, right? Things that I really crave, that I really desire out of the internet and this connected experience is deep, contemplated thoughts, thoughtful discussions, really contemplative thinking in the online space that just isn't there for a number of reasons. And even when you have somewhat of that kind of space, it's filled with people who aren't respected, who don't really understand that need or desire, who are also welcome to just kind of troll in that domain as well. And so it becomes almost a full-time job just to even create an environment that makes it possible. And speaking to everything that he's kind of addressed, we're starting to see now, even the places that claim to be these things, this one app that I disdain, which claims to be the app for intellectuals, and it's these, you go on and you kind of engage with books, like summary Spark Notes versions of books, and you get to, they claim it's the app for intellectuals, but then you go see the ad or go see if you download the app, the types of books that are in there, and it's the financial, wizard guy, or, the subtle art of not giving a fuck. It's like not intellectual reading. It's people who, read books. Reading books, nah. I'm going to be pretentious if I say that. Let's move on. Point being that we're in a bad spot when we think that is legitimately a good substitute for the level of intellectual thought and careful contemplation and deep discussion that we've had throughout history, and that we seem to really have an absence of today. So anyway, he's talking about the dynamics of kind of the early internet and the experience of this slower networked media. And it's partially because of that early experience that they held these philosophies, these beliefs about what the technology could be. But yeah, so it shouldn't surprise us that this deliberate highly sequential mode of behavior is utterly consistent with the programs and code underlying the digital universe. Digital technologies are biased away from time and toward asynchronicity. Their operating systems were designed this way because, in most respects, computers think much faster than people. They can give themselves new instructions almost instantaneously. But they also need to be able to wait as long as necessary for instructions from a person typing through a keyboard. So programmers decided that computers shouldn't live in time at all. Yes, there are clocks running in the background on all computers, but they take their orders regardless of the passage of time. That's the difference. They operate from decision to decision, choice to choice. From the computer's perspective, nothing happens between the moments someone types any two letters on the keyboard. So because computer code is biased away from continuous time, so too are the programs built on it and the human behaviors those programs encourage. Everything that we do in the digital realm both benefits and suffers from its occurrence outside of time. Maybe that's why the net's first true killer app was email. At first, email did not replace the letter so much as it replaced the phone call. Instead of having to find and catch a real person at home, email found a person when he or she wanted to be found. Email was an activity one went and did, usually on a daily basis or twice daily basis. Unlike the phone, which interrupts our day by unexpectedly ringing whenever someone wants to reach us, email was retrieved when we wanted to see it. And we were free to respond in our own time, on our own conditions. If we didn't have a response at the ready, we could come back later. The underlying asynchronous quality of email and conferencing was much more obvious to us back then because we all saw the way these tools really worked. And so, he's explaining the time that it would take to engage with all of this stuff. Was it slower? Perhaps. But it was also a more accurate reflection of the way the technologies work and their bias away from real-time communication. Their strength was never their relationship to the now, but their ability to slow down or break up the now. And that's a huge thing. I think something that we've gotten wrong, and a key point here is one of the ways that we've begun, or a change in the conversation around technology has been about the now, being the fastest, being able to be the most connected, which wasn't really part of the original conversation and was never a perceived benefit historically because the technology didn't function like that anyway. So I think good thing to note and a place to look as we shape the future of this is like, we got to break away from this immediacy and return to this asynchronous nature. I really like this example, so I'm gonna take the time to focus on this too. The first interactive device most of us ever used was the remote control. More than simply allowing us to change channels at the end of a TV program, the remote control gave us the ability to change channels during a TV program. It allowed us to deconstruct the narrative of a show or even a commercial. Until interactivity, we were defenseless emotional targets for the advertiser, who could use a linear story to put us in a state of vulnerability. Think of almost any television commercial. A person gets in terrible trouble, the product gets her out. A girl gets a pimple before the prom, she tries all sorts of things to get rid of it, making matters worse. Just when it looks like all is lost, she finds the miracle cream. It works, boyfriend shows up, happy prom girl. The continuous narrative arc is used to draw the audience into a state of tension. Only the storyteller, the advertiser, has the way out. To be released from tension, we must accept the storyteller's answer, meaning the advertiser's product. We may have understood that the people making us anxious were not our friends, that the stuff on television is called programming for a reason. But we were relatively powerless to do anything about it other than not watch at all. So you'd have to be pretty motivated to get up and change the channel or adjust the antenna at the top of the set to avoid a commercial. But point is, with the invention of the remote, we could escape With the micro motion of the thumb, the interactive device introduces discontinuity into the otherwise continuous medium. And this discontinuity, this deconstruction of story, is a form of power. In a similar way, the VCR allowed us to record shows to watch later. DVR lets us not only do that, but also pause shows during broadcast and fast forward through commercials. Each step of the way, we use the asynchronous bias of digital technology to take control of time. And a medium once celebrated for its ability to program the public becomes open to our intervention. Instead of only fostering social programming, the television also fosters a new postmodern perspective on society's time-honored truths. From Bart Simpson to Stephen Colbert, conventions are turned on their heads. So now we're getting into sort of the modern era, and as the internet connections grow faster, fatter, and freer, we're more likely to adopt an always-on approach. Broadband connections, whether in our homes or in our phones, keep our applications on, updating, and ready at every moment. Anytime anyone or anything wants to message, email, tweet, update, notify, or alert us, something dings on our desktop or vibrates in our pocket. Our devices, and by extension, our nervous system, are now attached to the entire online universe all the time. Is that my phone vibrating? We scramble to keep up with the never-ending inflow of demands and commands under the false premise that moving faster will allow us to get out from under the endless stream of pings for our attention. For answering email and responding to text or tweets only exasperates the problem by leading to more responses to our responses, and so on. So we strive to multitask, attempting to give partial attention to more than one thing at a time, when all we really do is move as quickly as possible from one task to another. No matter how proficient we think we are at multitasking, studies show our ability to accomplish tasks accurately and completely only diminishes the more we try to do at the same time. This is not the fault of digital technology, but the way that we use it. Instead of going online to get our email comes to us. Instead of using our inbox as an asynchronous holding bin, we stick it into our phones, which we are sure to thump, ding, or shudder with each new incoming message, just to make sure we know something wants our attention. We work against the powerful bias of a timeless technology and create a situation in which it is impossible to keep up. And so we sacrifice the thoughtfulness and deliberateness of our digital media once offered for the false goal of immediacy, as if we really can exist in a state of perpetual standby. Boom, mic drop. This is a huge thing and something I'm really focused on and care very deeply about. Fortunately, I began putting in the work to distance myself from this exact problem a while ago, and I'm at a point where I no longer feel the same urges or twitches that other people seem to have, and that I personally experienced as well. But it's something that I find fascinating, particularly at work. And I've been getting a little bit of trouble lately, so in terms of work advice, maybe don't take mine, because this is part of why I'm in trouble. But it's always baffled me, this expectation. We have email, now we also have Teams. And he goes on to talk about, like, the results aren't pretty. Instead of becoming empowered and aware, we become frazzled and exhausted. We have no time to make considered responses, feeling instead obligated to reply to every incoming message on impulse. We reduce the length and complexity of our responses from paragraphs to sentences to TXTS texts, making almost everything we transmit sound like orders barked over a walkie-talkie in a war zone. And this is something I've grappled with a lot, because it's totally something I reject and cannot stand, and is, as I've distanced myself from it, it's something I need, and it's hard to escape it, especially in work settings. Because you're so available, others expect you to be that available all the time, at least during work hours from 9 to 5. If you think, honestly, if you think about burnout and the stress of everything, a lot of it just comes from this dynamic right here. And so, I don't know, just one of the things that I've started doing and I continue to do now is I don't allow people to dictate when I give them my attention like that. Especially if I'm actively working and working hard on something. Today was a great example. Like, I'm in the office, right? My team, most of my team is there. I got a question IM'd to me on Teams about an email. So we got a communication about another communication and whether or not a response had been made. Could have come and spoken to me directly, and it would have taken 15 seconds to have that conversation. But he chose to message me on Teams, and I'm at a busy, high stress, high stakes point right now, and particularly on this deliverable. So I'm giving my attention to that. This other thing, which isn't necessary, but the direction is coming from up top, and so it feels necessary, but there's not any genuine sense of urgency here, other than sort of personal pride and commitment to that. Anyway, long story short, I waited until I was ready to engage with that message. I finished up the work that I was doing because multitasking doesn't work. And then I was able to direct my attention there for the time that I needed to spend on it. On top of that, and one of the main points, reasons why I wanted to focus on this and speak about the work experience is because coincidentally, and another synchronicity, this meeting about super communicators, it was a sort of lunch and learn type of thing, and his big takeaway had to do with multitasking, and he used that as an opportunity to sort of call out the tendency for people to do other work during meetings, and the emphasis on how multitasking isn't really possible and it's more harmful than helpful. That said, I just think it contradicts what is ultimately necessary in order to meet the standards and expectations of the account and the team and he himself. So I found myself silently noticing the contradiction there and how out of place it was. But as it comes down to everything that we're talking about here. So interesting, and to expand on that a little bit here, it's not that the net has somehow changed from an asynchronous medium to a synchronous one. It's all still just commands existing in a sequence outside time, but those commands are now coming at us now in increasingly rapid bursts, stimulating us to respond at rates incompatible with human thought and emotion, and in ways that are not terribly enjoyable. Try as we might, we are slow to adapt to the random flood of pings, and our nervous systems are not happy with this arrangement. For the first time, regular people are beginning to show the signs of stress and mental fatigue once exclusive to air traffic controllers and 911 operators. Cell phone users now complain of phantom vibration syndrome, the sensation of a cell phone vibrating on your thigh, even though there's no phone in your pocket. Yet this very discomfort and anxiety compels us to seek still more, the possibility of one great email from a friend or one good contract offer somewhere down in that list of unanswered messages keeps us compulsively checking our inboxes, iPhones, and Blackberries, like classically conditioned gamblers at the slot machines. And perhaps counterintuitively, the faster we empty our inbox, the faster it fills up again. Every answered email spawns more. The quicker we respond, the more of an expectation we create that we will respond that rapidly again. An email chain becomes like a conversation happening in real time, except much less efficiently than a phone call. The slower we respond, the more we do the net on our own schedule instead of the one we think it is imposing on us. the more respect we command from the people on the other side of the screen. Unfortunately, many of us don't feel we have even the right to dictate our own relationship to the incoming digital traffic. And that was actually more to the point of what I was trying to get at before, which is, the slower we respond, like the way that we're engaging, especially today, it becomes noticeable if you're slower to respond. I do think it's kind of funny, and I would like to maybe put this under the part about the slower we respond, the more respect we command from the people on the other side. I think that's maybe true for your secondary and beyond interactions, but I think today your immediate team, in a work environment, especially a fast-paced work environment, they don't feel that way. And I think that's the reason why a lot of people feel like they don't have the right to dictate their own relationship with incoming digital traffic. And it's frustrating because, right, we've set new precedents, new standards. And so it's easy for those who are fine with this dynamic to just say, well, if you can't handle it, then this isn't for you. That's been a frustrating part of my experience. Of course, the simplest way out is to refuse to be always on, to engage with the digital, to connect to the network can still be a choice rather than a given. That's the very definition of autonomy. We can choose any number of things, but we're more likely to ignore the timeless bias of the digital and aspire to catching up with its ever elusive pace. The more we live this way, the more we value the digital's definition of the now. Our search engines preface their more relevant results with a section of live links to whatever blog, comment, social networking message, or tweet has most recently been posted containing the words in our queries. And so the only weighing that matters is how few seconds have transpired since it was blurted. So in turn, it encourages us to value the recent over the relevant. And this is where media critics and concerned educators have lamented the effects of short messaging on brain capacity. The real influence of our interaction with these programs is not on our neurons as much as our habits and outlook. Our brain, thanks to neuroplasticity, our brains do change depending on what we do. A brain learning on computers ends up wired differently than a brain learning on textbooks. It's nothing new. Brains learning through text are different than ones learned through oral teaching too. Same way that kids who play with mostly dolls end up wired differently than the ones who build bridges with blocks. There's a misplaced anxiety here. Our brains adapt to different situations. Technologies have always changed us. Fire gave us a way to cook meat, essentially pre-digesting food and altering the evolution of both our teeth and digestive tract. Wearing fur allowed us to shed our own. Likewise, text changed the way we process and remember information, and television changed the way our brains relate to three-dimensional space. Digital media now extends some of these trajectories while adding a few of its own. The outsourcing of memory to machines expands the amount of data to which we have access, but degrades our brain's own ability to remember things. Yet this process of offloading our remembered information began with the invention of text and met with similar critique even back then. We have been consistently using our brains less as hard drives and more as processors, putting our mental resources into active RAM. What's different now, however, is that it's not just lists, dates, and recipes that are being stored for us, but entire processes. The processes we used to use for finding a doctor or a friend, mapping a route, or choosing a restaurant are now being replaced by machines that may in fact do it better. What we lose in the bargain, however, is not just the ability to remember certain facts, but to call upon certain skills. It's a bit like doing arithmetic by algorithm, which most of us learned steps to get our answer. but we forget how or why it really works. So instead of simply offloading our memory to external hard drives, we're beginning to offload our thinking as well. And thinking is not like a book you can pick up when you want to in your own time. It is something that's always on. Are we choosing to surrender the ability to do it without digital assistance? If so, are we prepared to remain connected to our networks all the time? What new ability, if any, are we making room for in the process? Recognizing the biases of the technologies we bring into our lives is really the only way to stay aware of the ways we are changing in order to accommodate them, and to gauge whether we are happy with that arrangement. Rather than accepting each tool's needs as a necessary compromise in our passively technologized lifestyles, we can instead exploit those very same leanings to make ourselves more human. And that's the end of chapter 1. So, long video here, I know, but very good stuff. Very excited to keep going on. Glad that I was able to capture this. Ironic that I did it this way. But I would say, to somewhat try to justify this exercise here and what I've been doing, I do go back and re-engage with this stuff, and I engage with it in different ways. I go and transcribe it, and I'm typing and I'm editing. Sometimes I will, what I'm beginning to do is now introduce the written aspects too. I'm trying to practice writing essays to make my, force myself to practice that memory and recall in a way that would be kind of like having a conversation with someone about any of this stuff. But also to just sort of practice, engaging with that work in different ways so that I can see it from different perspectives. And ultimately to have a concise, well thought, deeply considered position, argument, case about these things that I can make in a concise, well-articulated way. So ultimately, I think I've taken the ownership of the way that I'm engaging with these devices. Last thing I would say, I'm definitely not perfect, and I have been at what I would consider my ideal dynamic in the past. Lately, I've been consuming a lot, too much, and YouTube is my voice there. Having the sort of premium account, no ads, watching long form content there, I can just keep going. So all to say, there's a lot of really insightful stuff here, a lot of things worth considering. I'm interested in seeing what else he has to say.